Hello, it's just Koan number one. First Koan. I'm a little nervous. What Bruce Nauman did when he spilled coffee in my dream. Well, the title pretty much explains it. This is, in fact, a dream that I had, and I had the dream the night before I started 108 Koans. I had a start date on the calendar that from that point on, I was going to be producing Koans, and I was going to be trying to kind of maintain that beginner's mind. So the night before that date, I had this dream in which Bruce Nauman spilled coffee on the floor and then got down and started blowing it around as a piece of art. And then I still remember this. I remember this dream not as well as 5 years ago, I'm sure, but I still remember this part about floating old kind of nasty sandwiches in a fountain. So I woke up that morning and thought, okay, that dreaming about Bruce Nauman, that seems like a pretty good omen. If you watch my intro video, you know that I'm very much influenced by Bruce Nauman, and the idea that the artist in the studio, anything the artist does in the studio is art, and so I knew waking up that okay, this is my first con. Then the question is, how do I represent that? So I decided to represent it as a reenaction of Bruce Nauman's action in my dream. And what better place to record it than my studio? This is in my MFA studio on the SIU campus that I shared with Darian Williams, and I set the camera up way up in the corner and recorded myself blowing this coffee around, which I remember actually being pretty interesting. It sounds stupid, but I don't know. Liquid dynamics are pretty cool, actually. So I say here I observed some details about blowing coffee that I otherwise would have missed. And here we have actually right off the bat, I'm trying to make these into instructions for other people to follow. So I say you could also try reenacting scenes from your dreams, see what you notice. So I'm trying to get this out of the realm of like, oh, here's a video of me blowing coffee around on the floor, art, and making it something that anyone else can do. All right, Koan number 2, Indeterminate composition for Percussionist. So this is an instruction in the form of a musical composition. For Percussionist, 1, play any instrument once, beginning the piece, which I do here in this video. And 2, do not play that instrument again until you are required to, thus ending the piece. Don't forget to count rests. So everything in my life from that clave hit there to the next time I played a clave is essentially part of this performance. So it's very much in the vein of John Cage's 4 minutes 33 seconds. You know, there's a beginning, there's an ending, and then everything within that duration, every indeterminate event that occurs within that duration is essentially part of the composition. So this is for a percussionist specifically, because the life of an orchestral percussionist most of the time is, you have a cymbal crash, a big cymbal crash, and then you are counting for 100 measures before your next cymbal crash, and then it's another 150 measures before your next cymbal crash. So there's a lot of time in between where you are not playing anything. So this is kind of like a fun thing for percussionists. It turns that time where you aren't performing into a performance. So it could be, it's interesting, I think, because it could be like really short. Let's say you're playing a snare drum and you're playing 16th notes, and every microsecond in between snare drum hits could be an individual performance of this composition. Or like I did, you play a clave once and then you think that you're going to be playing it again in another week, and everything that happens in your life for that week is part of the performance. And that didn't quite work out how I intended, because I ended up not playing a clave in a week. So it ended up this performance ended up even longer than I anticipated. There's kind of an analogy here that you can figure out for yourself, but I'll just say that a good percussionist is not just standing around waiting for their part to come up, but they're actively engaged in the music, in the performance, even when they aren't actually playing anything. They are actively listening and breathing with the rest of the orchestra. So that's Koan number 2. Koan number 3, speaker buzzer connections have no polarity. And I still have these buzzers. They're amazing. I've used these things in so many improvisations and stuff like that, and they're loud as shit. I love these. So this is like the second Koan in a row that's kind of John Cage related, because I needed those buzzers for performance of Credo in Us, or Credo in US, I think it's sometimes rendered. So I needed some buzzers, and who else to turn to but my dad, because he's just brilliant with that kind of thing. He's brilliant with making stuff, and he's brilliant with electronics, and I wish you could know him a little bit. Because he doesn't, I think, identify in that way as being like an artist and a maker, but he totally is. And I love the fact that I called him and I said, Dad, I need some buzzers, and I would love to learn more about electronics and stuff. And so instead of he could have just made them and sent them to me, but instead he kind of gathered the parts and did a lot of the work for me, but left like just enough to do that I could feel like I was kind of putting some of it together myself. And I just love everything about the diagrams that he makes, and his handwriting, and just these notes that I have no idea what they mean, but he felt that they were important. And this one was particularly cryptic to me at the time. Speaker buzzer connections have no polarity. Now that I've been messing around with Arduino and stuff, I kind of have a better idea what that is. But indicating power light shows power present after fuse, not before it. There's just something that's particularly poignant about. Maybe it's that I just had a baby boy, so I'm. But there's something about a father trying, not necessarily succeeding, but trying to pass his expertise on to his son. and I have a lot of respect for my dad, and I love silly things like this where like buzzers can probably be sound deadened by stuffing foam or whatever around vibrating plate, parentheses inside, parentheses thick foam and packing box. And his periods are circles. I think I'm actually gonna start like tearing up here. Just that I have this like kind of piece of my father here documented. Koan number 4, testing equipment for live streaming. This is interesting because this is, I think, the only Koan that exists outside of my website as far as like the actual documentation of it. The only video Koan that relies on some third party, and interestingly, if you click this link here, it's no longer available. I don't know why. It's been 5 years since I've even thought about Ustream or logged into my account, so I don't know why it's not available anymore. But that's it was a conscious decision on my part to host this video on this third-party thing, knowing that that was a possibility, that someday it would just be gone. The video itself, I remember being very long, very boring, and actually one of my notes here in my my Koan notebook from 5 years ago is boring, and why would anyone watch this? So the sitting and watching the video all the way through was not really an essential part of this Koan to begin with. It's really, I think, I say here, I recorded myself trying and failing to set up equipment to stream from an external camera. Again, going back to Bruce Nauman and anything you do in your studio. This was me in my studio trying to figure something out with video, which I've spent a lot of time in my life doing. It's I've done so many tests, for this for this 108 Koans retrospective of trying different recording setups and hooking up different cameras and microphones and uploading to YouTube and uploading to Vimeo and all kinds of different permutations to just try to get the best thing. And that work, that is work, and that's like probably not as thought about as much as a video artist, as part of your artistic work. Kind of like I don't know, it's like a painter, learning how to stretch their own canvas and learning about the chemistry of different paints and stuff like that. If you're working with video, you have to understand input, output, and I was doing this kind of complicated series of trying. I don't remember exactly what I was doing, but trying to get some old ass camera that had RCA out into a computer to live stream. This was 5 years ago. Live streaming, I think, was not nearly as easy as it is now. So this was just a documentation of me in my studio failing to do something, which I think is important. It's important to recognize failure as part of your process. And when I was defending my thesis, actually, I told my thesis committee that I think a lot of my Koans were failures. Some of them are not really that particularly interesting, I think, in and of themselves as a piece of art. I think altogether as a body of work, they fit in, but I as I said in my introduction, I didn't want to edit myself too much, and so I said to my committee that there are failures in here, and they were kind of aghast at that, but and kind of actually defensive of, like, oh, no, they're not failures, like, don't call them failures, they're, that's like such a bad negative term. But I'm saying no, failures, I want to call them failures and recontextualize the connotation of the word failure. Anyways, this is a failure in a lot of ways. What I was doing didn't work. It no longer is available to even see, and it's not that interesting of a Koan to begin with. And that is what life is a lot of the time. And this Koan, I think, might help someone who, if you feel like you've just like wasted an entire day, think about this Koan. Koan number 5, trying to get into my studio on a Sunday. This is probably one of my favorites. The usual routine that I go through to get into my studio on the weekend, it's a different door that's unlocked every time. So, this was my routine to try to get into my studio. As MFA students, we had a studio in the basement of this building, and we had these little electronic fobs that were supposed to allow us into the building at any time, but those fobs never worked, and no matter how many times we complained about it, they never worked, and nobody ever fixed it. So if I wanted to get into my studio after the building was locked, I had to just hope that I could find an unlocked door somewhere. And so this is an example of those just stupid institutional barriers that no one knows about except for the people that are affected by them, and the people that are affected by them have to just deal with them and just make them a part of their everyday life, and they never get fixed. So this is like a performance of that, of this. I check these doors first because they're closest to the parking lot and also closest to my studio. Even though they're the least likely to be unlocked, I check them first, and then I had this whole calculation in my head of how likely is the door to be unlocked, how far away is it, and so I had this kind of course plotted. So it's a performance of that routine that became incorporated into my life because of this institutional problem. It's also kind of reclaiming this time that I spent frequently. This is preventing me from getting work done. I can't get into my studio, which means I can't do work. I can't make art. So I'm reclaiming that as a performance, as art making. The prevention of art making causes art to be made here. And it's highlighting how ridiculous this is. the best part is when I finally find the open door, which this door that I'm walking to right here was the most likely to be unlocked. It was the one that was unlocked most of the time. I go to it last here because it was the farthest away, but this is the door that we are, anybody trying to get into the building late at night is probably going to end up going through this door. So, in a giant FU from the university, there's this sign on this door that it's like the institution is blind to itself. Like whatever entity within the institution that puts up this sign is completely ignorant of the fact that this door is being used excessively because the institution is forcing us to use this door. So, and then it makes us feel guilty about that for using a door that's intended for disabled people. So I love this Koan. I love highlighting institutional stupidity and recontextualizing it and kind of reclaiming it. So that's Koan number 5. I finally get into my studio. Koan number 6. I cannot resist a pun. So this is meditation on the Holey mystery of the Road CD, part 1. Part 1 of 5, as it turned out. And this Koan, I think, is notable for a couple reasons. One, it's the first in this series of 5, but also I realized upon watching this again that this is the first Koan in which I'm really physically exerting myself. That became a thread throughout several of the Koans, and even though I knew that this was impossible, that I could use a hole punch to create a hole in this thing, I was really trying. Like, watching this again, I'm like I don't remember it that well. I thought maybe I gave it a few good attempts and then gave up, but watching this now, I'm like, damn, I really sincerely tried to do this. And didn't give up at all until finally the CD just broke. And I was definitely in physical pain doing this. So I think that's interesting, and I think it's interesting that happened first in this Koan that I call a meditation. The idea of physical exertion as a form of meditation, I think, is something I really like exploring. I guess the only other thing to say about this is I'm fascinated by man-made objects and I guess their ultimate fate when they encounter nature or the elements, or even they encounter other man-made elements outside of their intended use. And so I found this thing in the road, and really, like, seriously, how did this happen? It seems totally unlikely that two little holes would form in the CD without having cracks, going out to the edge or even going between them. So I'm fascinated by what process occurred that led to this. And even though I know that this series, I try hole punching and drilling and other methods, and knowing that none of the things I tried were what led to this happening, but I just like the idea of going about this kind of scientific experiment, and it's actually almost kind of like a parody of a scientific experiment. I guess a theme that I'm seeing now that I don't know if I was aware of at the time is recreation. So here I'm trying to recreate some natural process that put the holes in these CDs. In the previous Koan, I was recreating my own routine. Recreating a dream in the first one. So that's I don't think I really was aware of that actually until now. So Koan number 6. So I guess my first big insight in this retrospective. Koan number 7. There's not really that much to this Koan, so I'll take this opportunity to give some background information about the website, because this is the first Koan that there's a few Koans that are kind of like a meta thing about this being on a website. I think I talked about in my introduction that very early on I knew that all of this would be contained on a website, and I was kind of locking myself into that, that yes, you can take some of the Koans and separate them out, and I've had some of the Koans, the video Koans, send them to film festivals and stuff like that, but really it's a website, and because of some of these Koans that are like meta about the website, I can never like take them out of this website and this design of the website, because then they no longer make sense. So I will forever have this section of my website, like 108 Koans will always look like this. I will probably at some point update the rest of my site to look different, but this will always be as is. And so the page that you see there in Koan number 7 is this page, the grid view. And the initial idea that I had was that I would have this grid of 108 empty boxes like these that have the dotted border and no number. And as I did each Koan, I would upload it to the website. And so over several month period, you would see, if you check back in on the website regularly, you would see it updated. That didn't happen really. What I did instead was built the website, I made all the Koans, and then once I had completed all the Koans, I then got together all the documentation and put it on the website all at once. So really, the website just looked like an empty grid of these boxes for a long time. And this image is the result of a PHP error on when you're writing PHP and you have an error in your code, it actually prints. It displays the error on the web page itself. So it created this, like, because of the text being on the page along with the boxes, it created this weird cascade of boxes. And at the time, I think it kind of spoke to me. I must have done this like pretty early on, and so it's like this empty grid of boxes is just like it's undefined. It's this error is the result of an undefined variable in my code, and it was just kind of analogous to all of these undefined Koans kind of staring me in the face. I like emptiness in general and art. This spoke to me. Koan number 8, leaving and returning to Carbondale in 4 directions, 4 AF. That's Adrian, and I don't remember exactly what was going on at the time that prompted this koan, but I vaguely have the sense that, well, first of all, there were a lot of crazy things going on in our lives at that time. I vaguely have the sense that I had talked to Adrian and that there was something that she was mulling over, or maybe we were both mulling over something, and it was something that just needed some distance. I feel like it needed some distance from Carbondale. If you've never been to Carbondale, if you've never lived there, it's kind of hard to describe the weird vortex of energy that is Carbondale. It almost seems inescapable sometimes. So I do a lot of deep thinking while I'm driving. So I think this was kind of like an empathetic act that Adrian was really kind of trying to sort through something in her life, and it probably related to me. And so I just drove. I just started driving and thinking, and drove all the way to Marion, and then Carbondale sucks you back in, and then I drove up to DeSoto and back, and then Murfreesboro and back, and to Makanda and back. And sometimes you're just not ready to deal with life at the moment, and you just need some time to transition, and to travel and move and think and perhaps escape, although in the end you have to go back to Carbondale. In the end, we all go back to Carbondale. And that's Koan number 8. Koan number 9, the cost of yesterday's koan. This is the first intertextual, or is it intratextual koan? Anyways, it's the first koan that references another koan. There's a few pairs of koans that do that, but this is the cost of koan number 8, driving. What is it called? Driving, leaving and returning to Carbondale in 4 directions, which used a lot of gas, and so this is me filling up my gas tank. with the caption consumption here. So I think probably I had a little bit of guilt about blowing a bunch of gas on just driving around aimlessly. And I don't know, maybe some of the irony of these advertisements playing freedom. Anyways, this is an art expense, you know. It's like, it's funny. I as an artist, I don't spend money on like paint and canvas and pencils and stuff all the time. I'm spending money on, in this case, gas. Filling my gas tank as an expense of art making, and then turning that itself into a Koan.